My name is Leonardo DeLuca. I'm 52 years old. I've been a civil engineer for 3 decades, a father for 27 years, and a husband for 25. I've always believed in steady hands, clean plans, and the idea that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and kept your word, things would work out. But life has a brutal sense of humor. Sometimes, it lets you live in the illusion of safety for decades, then rips it away in one afternoon. It happened on a Tuesday. A typical morning that began with lukewarm coffee, an inbox full of minor construction site updates, and a slight detour through Riverview Estates because of roadwork. I wasn't supposed to be in that part of town. If it hadn't been for a closed bridge, I wouldn't have turned onto Magnolia Lane. And if I hadn't taken Magnolia Lane, I wouldn't have seen it, Clara's silver Honda Civic, half hidden behind a row of bushes in front of Gregor's house. Gregor Palmer, my son-in-law. He married our daughter Anna 4 years ago. Gregor was one of those smooth-talking finance guys, expensive shoes, confident handshake, always talking in percentages and projected returns. I tolerated him, mostly for Anna's sake. She adored him, believed in him, stood up for him when I asked too many questions at family dinners. Clara liked him more than I did. Much more. Too much in retrospect. But even Clara's fondness for Gregor didn't explain why her car was parked at his house on a weekday morning, with the engine still slightly warm when I walked past it. She was supposed to be at her yoga class. That's what she told me over breakfast. Don't forget to take the car in for its oil change, she'd said casually, stretching at the kitchen table in her workout gear. I'll be at yoga till noon. Yet here her car was, nestled behind Gregor's overgrown hedge, deliberately parked out of sight. My stomach twisted. I parked 2 houses down, got out, and walked along the sidewalk slowly. I wasn't even thinking clearly. My legs just moved on their own. When I reached the side of the house, I heard voices through the open window. I stopped. Clara's voice, calm, clear, unmistakable. He's never been suspicious. I've spent years setting this up, Gregor. The refinancing on the cabin, the separate accounts, the shifted assets. He signed everything I needed him to sign. Gregor's voice followed, more amused, like this was all some game. Unbelievable. And he still thinks everything's joint property. Clara laughed. It wasn't the laugh she gave me at night when we sat on the couch in tired silence. This was younger, freer. It sounded like it belonged to a different woman entirely. Yes, he's always trusted me with the paperwork. The house, the accounts, it's all split now. On paper, it'll look fair. But I'll walk away with everything that matters. There was a pause. I could hear the clinking of glasses. So, how soon do we pull the trigger? Gregor asked. You file next week? Yes. We've already contacted the lawyer. Once it's filed, it'll move fast. He's not the type to fight. He'll be too stunned to react. And the money? Gregor asked. What about the liquidation plan? The main property will net close to $3 million once we sell. The investments are in my name. The trusts for the kids stay untouched, so no one looks greedy. It's clean, Gregor. It's watertight. I stood completely still. My knees locked. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and hit record. Their voices continued, weaving their betrayal into perfect sentences, like they'd rehearsed it. Gregor chuckled, then asked in a hushed voice, and what about after? You and me. A pause. Then Clara, give it 6 months. We don't want the optics to look bad. But yes, after that, we'll be free. That's when I stopped recording. I stepped back from the window slowly, as if any sound would make this worse. I didn't remember walking back to the car. I don't remember driving for the next hour. All I recall is the voice in my head, hers, his looping, mixing with the dull realization that 25 years of marriage had been leading to this moment. To a plan. To a setup. I pulled over on the shoulder of an old service road and stared at my phone. The recording was there. 2 minutes and 17 seconds long. Evidence of betrayal. Proof that I was nothing more than a useful idiot in a long con orchestrated by my wife and the man who was supposed to be part of our family. I didn't cry. Not then. The emotion didn't come. Only the silence. The heavy, pressing kind. The silence of something ending without permission. When I finally returned home that evening, Clara was in the kitchen making lemon chicken, the scent warm and familiar. She looked up with a smile. "Hey, how was your day? You look tired." I smiled back, sat down, pretended to be a man who still lived in the reality she thought I belonged to. "Just a long day," I said, "but it's good to be home." She kissed me on the cheek like she always did. Then she turned back to the stove. And I sat there, watching the back of the woman who had just, hours ago, plotted my erasure with a man I once called my son-in-law. She didn't know that I knew. But that wouldn't last. I didn't sleep that night. Not in the usual sense. I lay in bed next to Clara, watching the red numbers of the alarm clock crawl through the hours. I could feel the shape of her body under the sheets, her breathing slow and steady, completely at peace, while inside me, something heavy and ancient twisted itself tighter and tighter. Her betrayal hadn't arrived with a bang or a breakdown. It had arrived quietly, with familiarity, in a voice I once loved whispering schemes through an open window. And yet, part of me still wanted not to believe it. I found myself grasping for something, an explanation, a misunderstanding, a misheard word. Anything. But the voice in that recording was hers. Calm. Intentional. Too smooth to be accidental. By morning, my exhaustion had calcified into clarity. I sat in the kitchen with my coffee, watching the steam rise in the pale morning light. Across from me was the same old round table where Clara and I had once shared dreams. I could still picture her here with our daughter Anna in her arms, beaming with pride. I could still see the remnants of who we used to be. But now it all looked like a stage set after the final performance, props without meaning. As she came down the stairs, barefoot and humming, I forced a smile. "You're up early," she said, pouring herself a cup. "Couldn't sleep. Anything on your mind?" "No, just work." I paused. "Remember that little Italian restaurant on Lincoln, where we used to go after your shifts at the gallery?" She smiled distantly. "That place closed years ago." "Yeah," I said. "I was just thinking about it. How we used to sit outside even when it was cold." She murmured, taking a sip and turning away. That was it. A hum, a sip, a turn. No memory sparked. No warmth shared. After she left for a luncheon with her yoga group, I sat at my desk and opened an old drawer filled with photo albums, legal files, documents from projects long finished. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was looking for the truth of what we'd been. And when I found it, it hurt more than I expected. We met at a public art show in '98. I was presenting structural design work for a sculpture garden in Easton. She was standing near a modernist canvas, half amused, half critical. She looked so alive, so opinionated. We argued for 20 minutes about form versus function and ended up having coffee afterward. That was her, sharp-tongued, magnetic, unafraid to challenge anyone. We were married a year later. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. We couldn't afford much, but we didn't care. She wore a cream-colored dress that she'd sewn adjustments into herself. I remember how proud she was of that. How proud I was of her. For years, we supported each other without keeping score. When I had to put in 18-hour days during a bridge project in Virginia, she took care of Anna, the bills, everything. When her mother died, I canceled a week of meetings and flew to Reno with her the same day. We were a team. We didn't have to say it, we just were. And when the money came, it didn't change us. Not right away. We built slowly. One investment property, then another. She left the gallery job and started managing the rentals. We became comfortable, solid, respected, even. But somewhere in the last 10 years, something shifted. It was subtle at first. Comments about how I wasn't ambitious enough anymore. How I'd settled. She started comparing me to people I didn't know. Friends, husbands, colleagues, partners. Men who had done more, bought more, risked more. She said it casually, like a joke, but it landed hard. Then came the complaints about how I was always tired, always distracted. She said I'd become dull. She missed spontaneity. She missed the fire. I tried. I planned weekends away, tried cooking new recipes, even started yoga with her once. But none of it seemed to reach her. Looking back, I realized the woman I once loved had begun replacing me with a version of me she resented. And worse, I let her. I apologized when she grew cold. I gave in when she made demands. I let her manage the finances, telling myself it was her strength, while she used that trust to shift assets away from me. It wasn't a single moment. It was years of erosion. Tiny cuts, dismissed remarks, plans made without me, decisions for the good of the family that I didn't get to weigh in on. I didn't even see the betrayal coming because it wasn't an explosion. It was a slow drowning. And Gregor. God, Gregor. He had slithered in as the charming son-in-law. I always thought he was more flash than substance. But Clara adored him. They were always laughing at dinners, sending each other texts about some inside joke. I never thought it meant anything. But now I saw it clearly. She hadn't just prepared for betrayal. She had weaponized every part of our history to make it painless for her. She let me keep the illusion of partnership while she quietly moved everything into position. That night, as I looked at the documents in the drawer, the deed to the house, the original trust for Anna's education, old tax filings, I began cross-checking names. Signatures. Transfer dates. There were discrepancies. Things I vaguely remembered signing. Conversations I half-registered at the end of long days. I had trusted her. Completely. And she'd used that trust as her tool. Not only was the betrayal deep, it was professional. It wasn't born of emotion or conflict. It was deliberate, strategic, calculated. And that, more than anything, shattered me. I stopped calling it my office. It wasn't an office anymore. It was a headquarters. The space I had once used to review blueprints, draft site schedules, and pay bills had become something else entirely. I moved everything I didn't need into boxes and shoved them into the corner. I cleared the desk, sharpened pencils, installed a second monitor. I began printing, highlighting, annotating. There was no more denial, no more hesitation. If Clara had spent years preparing for this betrayal, then I would use every ounce of focus, discipline, and precision I had cultivated over decades to dismantle her scheme quietly, methodically, and without mercy. I began with a phone, the same one I'd used to record their conversation. That audio clip, 2 minutes and 17 seconds, was now copied to multiple drives and stored off-site. I kept a copy on an encrypted USB stick taped under the drawer. Every time I replayed it, it no longer hurt, it clarified. It reminded me who I was dealing with. I requested access to our joint financial records under the guise of needing to help Clara manage things, while she prepared for the supposed divorce she thought I didn't know about. She smiled, feigning appreciation. I smiled back. The game had begun. At first, the financials seemed ordinary. Mortgages, utilities, standard withdrawals. But then I spotted a pattern, transfers made biweekly to an account I didn't recognize. At first $1,200, then $3,500, then $7,000. Gregor Palmer. The payments were labeled consulting. From a rental property LLC Clara technically managed, but we both legally owned. I dug deeper. Gregor had registered 3 companies in the last 6 years. All inactive. No physical offices. No clients listed, but plenty of incoming payments, many from our holdings. Cross-checking dates, I saw she'd even signed off on reimbursing him for legal advisory fees. I called an old friend from university, Vincent, who now worked in compliance at a regional investment bank. I gave him Gregor's name and a quiet ask. If anything shady floats by, can you let me know? Vince owed me a favor. He didn't ask questions. 3 days later, I got an email. Subject, you were right to ask. Palmer's reputation in legal and financial circles is shaky. Nothing official, but he's on several radar lists for asset shielding, investor fraud, and suspected elder exploitation. He's never been charged, but he's been involved in cases where his name quietly disappears right before prosecution. Watch yourself. I sat at my desk, rereading the message until the words became meaningless shapes. Then I pulled the highlighter out of the drawer and marked every transaction linked to Gregor in yellow. The pages began to glow. Then came the credit card statements. I discovered a second card tied to Clara, one she never told me about. Registered under her maiden name, connected to a high-limit platinum account, paid monthly from an account I didn't have access to. I traced the expenses: luxury restaurants in D.C., high-end hotel bookings in Philadelphia and Boston, gifts from designer boutiques, and a transfer to a diamond wholesaler. My hands trembled, not from anger, but calculation. She had moved on long ago. This wasn't infidelity in the traditional sense. It was conversion. She had converted our life, our money, into a future where I didn't exist. But it wasn't just Clara. Gregor was drowning in debt. I found public filings of liens against one of his defunct LLCs, notices from the IRS, and a pending civil suit in Delaware over a failed real estate flip. He owed more than he could repay, and Clara had been funding his illusion of solvency. The irony? The woman who once scolded me for being too cautious with investments had been funneling money into a man who couldn't balance a checking account. That night, I sat in my newly christened headquarters and sketched a plan, not just to protect what was mine, but to strike back. I didn't want revenge for the sake of pain. I wanted justice. I wanted the balance of truth restored. I wanted them exposed, her for her manipulation, him for his leeching. I wanted to pull the curtain back and force them to look at what they'd become. I started with a list: secure all records, move copies of key documents off-site, consult a forensic accountant discreetly, begin asset protection strategies quietly, legally, investigate grounds for fraud and undue influence. The last item on my list I didn't write down: find their weakness, because everyone has one. And soon I would find theirs. It began on a Thursday. That morning, Clara left the house with her usual perfume and a breezy comment about meeting the girls for brunch. She even kissed me on the cheek, light, distracted, like someone sealing a routine. I watched her drive off from the upstairs window, the same way I had watched her car disappear behind Gregor's bushes just days earlier. This time, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. The plan was already in motion. The previous week, I'd quietly contacted my firm's corporate counsel under the guise of reviewing some pending acquisitions and asked for a referral to a discreet financial strategist. Not the kind of man who appeared on LinkedIn or had a firm with glass doors and receptionists. This one, Gerald Lynn, operated out of a plain office above a hardware store and didn't shake hands. He only asked for documentation and said 3 words when I was done: "We'll contain it." By Thursday morning, Gerald had executed the first phase, freezing every joint account under administrative audit. Clara wouldn't know it yet, but the credit cards she relied on would start declining by noon. The shared lines of credit were paused. The investment accounts had 2-factor verification changed to my devices. And the trust we'd established for Anna, ostensibly managed by both of us, was now isolated under a protective clause we drafted early in the marriage, one Clara had long since forgotten. At 12:43 p.m., my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I took a breath and answered. "Hey, Leo, it's me." Her voice was calm but strained. Too composed. "Hi," I said casually. "All good." "I'm not sure," she said, trying to sound amused. "My card just got declined at the restaurant. And then again at the boutique. Is something wrong with the bank?" I paused for just half a second. Not that I know of. Maybe fraud detection? You know how weird banks get." There was a pause on her end. "Did you talk to them?" "No, I lied. I've been in meetings all morning. Want me to call them?" "No, I'll do it," she said quickly. "It's probably nothing." Another pause. "How's your day?" I asked, and I could hear the confusion in her silence. "Fine. Just weird." "I'm sure it's a glitch," I said gently, like a man who still trusted her. "Let me know what they say." She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "I will." The call ended. I stared at the screen, watching her name fade. 2 hours later, the second call came. This time from Gregor. I didn't answer. He called again 5 minutes later. Then he sent a message: "Need to talk. Call me ASAP." I waited at 6:22 p.m. Another call, Clara again. This time I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one. Later that night, as we sat across from each other at dinner, she was quiet. She pushed her food around with her fork, occasionally glancing up at me. I kept my face neutral, my conversation light. I talked about a client who'd miscalculated beam weights and almost collapsed an entire edition. She smiled, barely, but her eyes weren't with me. She was elsewhere on the phone calls, the declined cards, the quiet panic swelling under her skin. The next morning, she stood in the doorway of my office, headquarters, and tried to sound casual. "Did you hear anything back from the bank?" I shook my head. "Nope." "Should I follow up?" "No," she said quickly. "I'll handle it." She turned and left. But she didn't close the door. That afternoon, Gerald called. She tried accessing the discretionary account in her name, redirected from the trust. We blocked it under the irregular activity clause. "Gregor," I asked. He attempted 2 wire transfers from the consulting LLC at 4:11 p.m. Both bounced. The holding company we set up rerouted everything. I smiled for the first time in days. "Good," I said. "Let them sweat." For the next 48 hours, they tried everything. Clara spent hours on the phone, yelling in hushed tones I could hear through the walls. Gregor left a voicemail that started polite and ended sharp. His mask was cracking. By Sunday evening, I could feel it. They were starting to suspect. Not because I confronted them. Not because I accused. But because I didn't react at all. That's what scared them. That's what started to shift the ground beneath their feet. I hired the private investigator a week before the lockdown. His name was Mitchell Baines, ex-military, lean, expressionless, and dressed like a man who could disappear into any room. We met once in person, at a diner halfway between my office and his. I handed him a small file with names, photos, and addresses. He glanced once, closed it, and nodded. "You want audio, video, or just stills?" "All of it," I said. He slid a burner phone across the table. "Updates will come here." Discreet. Untraceable. The next Friday, the phone buzzed. New file uploaded. Clara and Gregor, Palmer Financial Consulting Office, Friday, 10:07 a.m. transcript attached. Audio clean. Video partially obscured. I plugged in my headphones, locked my office door, and hit play. Gregor's voice came through first clipped, tense, different from the confident tone I remembered. "She's acting weird." Every card declined. I tried 3 accounts, shut down. "He knows, Clara." He's not saying anything, but he knows. Then Clara, sharper than I'd ever heard her, her composure peeling away. "He's playing dumb." He smiled when I brought it up. "He's watching us unravel and pretending it's nothing." There was a beat of silence. Then she spoke again, low and precise. "We need to move faster." "To what?" Gregor asked. "You can't file without financial access. Your lawyer said we need liquidity." "We don't need money to accuse someone," Clara said. "We need a story. One that paints me as the victim. And him as the abuser." Gregor swore under his breath. "What kind of abuse? You think anyone's going to buy that?" "Leo's, he's bland. Vanilla. No one's going to picture him slamming doors or yelling." Clara was calm. Cold. Like she'd rehearsed it. Not physical. Emotional. Financial control. Chronic pressure. Dismissiveness. All the things you can't disprove. She paused. Then added something that stopped my breath. "We use Anna." "My daughter, my only child." Gregor hesitated. "You think she'd go along with that?" "She doesn't need to know the full extent. Just her professional opinion. She's a licensed psychologist. If I tell her I've been emotionally stifled for years, that I've been gaslit, that I felt unsafe, she'll support me. She's always resented how distant he was emotionally. You're saying we make him the villain in a narrative we control." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper, but the mic caught every syllable. "We don't need facts. We need feelings." Judges listen to pain. Anna becomes our expert witness. I become the woman who finally found the strength to speak up. You? You don't appear in the picture at all, not until the smoke clears." Gregor let out a nervous laugh. "Jesus. This is the only way," Clara said. "He's watching us. But he hasn't acted. That means he doesn't want to destroy me. Yet. So we move first. File before he does. Control the optics. Paint him as controlling, suspicious, maybe even manipulative. We'll say the financial lockdown is retaliation. You think Anna will testify? She won't testify. She'll write a letter. Or give a statement. Clinical. Detached. She won't even realize what she's supporting. They paused again. Then Gregor asked, almost sheepishly, and after that? We still. Yes, Clara said, without hesitation. After that, we're free. I paused the audio. The room was silent. My pulse was not. I sat back in my chair, hands steepled under my chin, and realized the depth of it all. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a siege. They were building a fortress out of lies, and now they were planning to use my daughter, our daughter, as the weapon to break through. And Clara, she'd planned every angle. She had counted on my silence, on my restraint, on my reputation. She thought I'd fall back, too dignified to fight. She didn't realize silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. The gloves were off now. And I wasn't playing defense anymore. A quiet Sunday morning arrived with an illusion of calm that I found almost unbearable. Sunlight wove through the curtains in soft patches, but my mind refused to soften. Each faint chirp in the hallway felt amplified, every breath dragging a weight behind it. I had spent the night going over the evidence, the recording, replaying Clara's conspiratorial words and Gregor's calculating reactions. I'd anticipated Anna asking questions, but when the knock finally came, it shattered me in ways I hadn't imagined. I opened the door to find Anna there, standing in the threshold with her shoulders slightly hunched, eyes wary yet fierce. Her gray sweatshirt fell just right between casual and distracted, and her hair was pinned up messily, an improvisation that mirrored the tension radiating from her. "Dad," she said, in that voice that always makes my blood still and rush at the same time. Neither child anymore, but now a woman who had lived long enough to see the cracks and brave enough to demand answers. "Anna," I managed. I stepped aside wordlessly. For a moment, it felt as though time pressed around us, waiting. She walked in and took a seat where I'd already set a chair near the coffee table. I offered her coffee automatically, and she shook her head, her silence more meaningful than the acceptance would have been. I sat across from her. The stillness between us was overloaded with unsaid words. I waited until she spoke. "Something's wrong," she said, flatly. "With Mom. And with Gregor." I nodded, too aware of how much that word carried. "Can you tell me what's happening?" I'd rehearsed ways to respond to this conversation 1,000 times in the dark, but opening my mouth felt like tearing something delicate inside me. Unexpectedly, Anna spoke first. "I found a wire transfer this morning. It was from Mom's account, my account too, though we're not supposed to mix that." I looked at it because something felt off. When I asked Gregor, he just got irritated and told me to stop snooping. Her gaze, steady and unsparing, held mine. There was anger, but also vulnerability there. She'd been spinning her sense of normal around us, around Clara and Gregor's carefully curated facade. Almost without thinking, she said, "I didn't think you'd know." I didn't respond at once. Instead, I reached for the USB stick taped under my desk drawer, where I'd placed it after transferring the recording. My hands didn't shake, though my chest gripped around each inhale. I set the stick into the laptop and cued the recording. I didn't say what it was. I simply played. Clara's voice filled the room, sharp, confident, planning the emotional weaponizing of Anna. Gregor's voice followed. The words spun around us, a twisted lullaby that distorted every memory I'd held dear. Anna listened. Her expression changed slowly: confusion, shock, something unmasked and raw. She clenched her hands in her lap, as though gripping something intangible. I watched her reaction with a taut calm, feeling a profound stillness. When the audio ended, the room tasted of silence. She exhaled, stilled. Then, in a strange, thick whisper, she was going to use me. I didn't need to respond. My presence was confirmation. Anna's eyes flicked up to me, wide with something like grief. She always had this way of telling half the story, making herself soft and trapped, but steering the narrative. I didn't realize it was this. "I never meant for you to be caught in this," I said, voice hoarse with control. Anna shook her head. "They put me here, and I'm tired of playing their part." Tears escaped unbidden. She leaned forward abruptly and then gathered herself. I've spent so many moments siding with them because I thought that was what love demanded, because I didn't want to choose. Her eyes unchoked then, transforming. But this is different. She let the words rest. They echoed between us. I don't care what it costs me, she continued. My practice, my friendships, even my marriage, I'll not be their tool. My heart clenched at that final phrase. I'd imagined her siding with me, but not with such courage, not with such conviction. It's not on you, I said softly. She shook her head again. It is on me. Because they lied to me, Dad. They seduced me with half-truths and faded compassion, so I'd think they needed me. I do care what it costs me. I'm not going to lie in court for them. Not now. Not ever. The gravity of her words pulled me upright. We were no longer a father and daughter in a living room. We had become allies. A team. Truth had finally welded us together. She stood, leaned on the edge of the table, and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any moment I'd held her in, longer than our last embrace before this nightmare. When she pulled away, she looked at me with a resolute softness. You're not doing this alone. We stood in silence, an intensity unspoken between us. I saw the pain etched in her expression, betrayal, yes, but also the resolve to rebuild. When she left, she did so with a newfound purpose, her shoulders firm, her eyes brighter. The front door clicked shut behind her, and the emptiness in the house felt different, not heavier this time, but filled with promise. I sat back at my desk, staring at the paused recording still on the laptop screen. The stakes had just shifted. They didn't just lose me as a husband. They were about to discover they'd lost my daughter too. Some men roar when betrayed. Others retreat and heal in silence. But I discovered a third path, a middle ground forged not by impulse or pride, but by precision. I became a quiet architect of consequences. In my world, appearances are everything. The country clubs, fundraisers, investor breakfasts, board luncheons, they operate not just on money, but on the soft currency of perception. One does not need to shout from the rooftops to bring someone down. You only need to ask the right question to the right person in the right tone. And that's how it began. The morning I made my first move, I met with an old friend, Alan Brooks, over coffee at a modest downtown cafe. Alan had once been one of Gregor's early investors, back when the man still paraded himself as a rising star in asset management. We talked about life, about Alan's new beach property, and then, casually, I asked, "Have you heard anything about Gregor lately?" Alan raised an eyebrow. "No. Should I have?" I smiled faintly, took a slow sip of my coffee, and said, "Just odd financial movements. A few shared accounts." Clara mentioned something about discrepancies. I didn't say anything further. I didn't need to. 2 days later, Alan withdrew his portion from a pooled fund managed by Gregor. It spread from there: one cup of coffee, one side conversation at a charity auction, one quiet word during a round of golf. I never accused. I never dramatized. I only planted seeds. And in this town, soil is fertile when scandal whispers through the roots. Clara, meanwhile, was beginning to feel the tremors in her own sphere. She had always prided herself on her position in the Riverview women's social circle. For years, she hosted art nights, book salons, and wine tastings that made her the beating heart of the group. But now, women she once considered confidants began to exclude her from group texts. RSVPs dried up. A close friend, Marcia, politely canceled a lunch due to sudden conflicts and never rescheduled. The subtle exile had begun. I was at the golf club when I overheard 2 women talking just a few tables away on the terrace. They didn't know I was within earshot. Or maybe they did. I heard her accounts got frozen. Some sort of legal audit. She's saying it's retaliation, but come on, who gets blindsided like that if everything's clean? I heard she's preparing to accuse Leo of abuse. Can you imagine? That man wouldn't raise his voice if his house were on fire. She's always been strategic. Too polished. Something about this feels manufactured. I didn't react. I simply focused on my scorecard and let the conversation pass like a breeze that had always belonged to me. Gregor's collapse, however, wasn't a slow burn, it was a house fire. The kind you try to put out only to discover it started inside the walls and had been smoldering for months. Clients began pulling out one by one. A retired couple in their 70s, whom I'd once introduced to Gregor at a gala, left him after their accountant found inconsistencies in quarterly reports. Then came an anonymous letter sent to a local business publication outlining questionable fund transfers between two of Gregor's shell companies. The paper didn't run the full letter, but the editor, someone I knew socially, called me. "I'm not naming sources, Leo," she said. "But if what I've been told is even half true, Gregor's about to have a very bad quarter." A week later, his firm's name was dropped from a local developer's advisory board. Then another client withdrew public association, citing ethical concerns. Gregor called me once, twice, 3 times. I never picked up. His final voicemail was shorter than the rest, angrier, more brittle. "I know what you're doing. You're poisoning people against us." Against me. You think this makes you righteous? It makes you small. Vindictive. Don't think you've won anything. But he didn't know me. He didn't know that I didn't need to win. I just needed the truth to breathe. Clara, for her part, tried to maintain appearances. She doubled down on her routines, going to her hair appointments, ordering her favorite wine from the boutique vineyard, posting carefully framed photos of yoga brunches that she wasn't really attending. But the cracks were showing. One morning, I found her standing at the sink, staring out the window with the water running, her coffee growing cold beside her. She turned slowly, holding her cup with both hands, and said, "I saw Meredith at the co-op." She barely looked at me. I said nothing. She used to come to me for advice. About everything. Now she acts like I'm tainted. Still, I said nothing. She was unraveling, and I was letting her feel every thread pull loose. At a fundraiser 2 Saturdays later, I arrived alone. People noticed. They always notice. Some offered warm greetings as though taking silent sides. Others gave subtle nods. One man, James Lathrop, a known donor and peer, put a hand on my shoulder and said with genuine weight, "Whatever happened, Leo, you carried it with class." Class. That was the key. The success of my retaliation was not in shouting or revenge, it was in restraint. In allowing them to reveal themselves. In letting silence be interpreted not as weakness, but as strength. Gregor, increasingly desperate, tried to pivot. He launched a new firm, short-lived, flashy, designed to look innovative. It lasted 3 weeks before the partner backed out. No investor wanted their money anywhere near the man who now appeared in whispers and warnings. And Clara? Her fall was harder to watch. Her pride had been her armor. But pride, when cracked, does not crumble, it shatters. She became jumpier at home, avoided eye contact during breakfast, retreated into her phone with a desperation that made her seem smaller. I watched it all without cruelty, without gloating, just with clarity. Anna, who visited often now, began to notice the shift too. One evening, as she and I sorted old documents for evidence of asset transfers, she looked at me and said, "She's starting to realize." She is, I said. She thought people would believe her version no matter what. She underestimated what people remember about character. Anna paused, smiled faintly. "And she underestimated you." I didn't smile. She counted on my silence. "You turned it into strategy." By the end of that month, I had regained control of nearly every financial asset that mattered. The accounts were secure. The trust protected. I'd frozen every remaining attempt at asset relocation. Clara had no legal foothold left to surprise me with. And socially? She still had friends, but fewer than she used to. Gregor still had clients, but only those too new or too desperate to ask questions. The balance of power had shifted. And all I had done was tell the truth carefully, quietly, relentlessly. The first stage was complete. Now it was time to begin the second. They were circling the drain now. Every move Clara and Gregor made was no longer strategic but erratic, built not on logic or leverage but panic. The walls were closing in. You could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. For people who once prided themselves on sophistication and control, the unraveling had begun to show in public, awkward pauses in conversation, forced smiles at events, whispers among their remaining peers that trailed them like shadows. At first, I let it play out without interference. There was no need to push. But after a few days, it became clear they weren't going down quietly. I had known they were looking for lawyers. That didn't surprise me. But what did strike me was how fast they were burning through names. Clara, it turned out, had approached at least 4 local attorneys specializing in divorce and asset division. She led with the narrative she'd constructed emotional abuse, financial coercion, a husband who used silence as punishment. But attorneys, especially the good ones, don't take cases built on melodrama. They want facts, documents, timelines, consistency. She couldn't provide any. 2 of them politely declined and didn't return her follow-ups. Another took the time to review the material and then sent a formal refusal with a line I'd come to love. "We don't believe we can represent you effectively given the available facts." The 4th was an older man in semi-retirement who Clara had leaned on in the past. She was counting on loyalty. He told her flatly, "You're trying to fight a man who knows how to keep records. This won't end well." Gregor had even worse luck. After the financial inquiry into his handling of client accounts became public, law firms were wary. His name now came with disclaimers. 2 clients had gone public and others were following suit. When he reached out to an aggressive litigation team in Baltimore, they asked for full access to his financials. He hesitated. They declined. Still, they didn't stop. That's when I realized they had moved from seeking justice to seeking damage. Gregor filed a retaliatory complaint to the state bar against me, a laughable attempt to suggest I'd unlawfully manipulated documents related to the trust and joint investments. The filing was thin, vague, barely even coherent in places. I only knew about it because my accountant received an unusual verification request and forwarded it to me confused. I contacted my counsel, submitted counter-evidence within 48 hours, and received formal notice 2 weeks later that the complaint had been dismissed outright. That might have been the end until Anna showed up at my door, white-faced, holding a printout. "They're using my name again," she said. "What?" She handed me the document, a preliminary affidavit draft, full of hollow language and manipulative framing. It listed her as a character witness, implying that she had knowledge of long-standing behavioral patterns in the home that contributed to Clara's emotional distress. It suggested that she had observed emotional isolation and subtle financial control tactics during her upbringing. "This is a lie," Anna said. Her voice was low, shaking. "They're twisting everything. This reads like a clinical diagnosis of a man I've never met. They're trying to make me their scalpel." I sat in silence for a moment, letting the rage pass through me without response. Then I looked her in the eye. "We're going to stop this. Cleanly, legally, but permanently. I've already contacted my clinic's legal advisor," Anna said. "If they try to submit this, I'll file a formal declaration refuting it. I'll testify if I have to. Under oath. On record. Whatever it takes." It was more than I had ever expected of her. "They're desperate," I said. "They know they've lost, but they can't stand the silence. So they're trying to scream their way out." Anna looked at me, pain written across her face. "How did it come to this?" "I think it always was this," I said. "We just didn't see it until now." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the state's Office of Financial Regulation had escalated its inquiry into Gregor's firm. The audit had moved from a preliminary stage to a formal investigation. Records were subpoenaed. Interviews were scheduled. Clients were contacted. It wasn't just paperwork anymore, it was law. Gregor tried to appear calm in public, but his posture had changed. Shoulders curled inward. Jokes more forced. His presence more rare. At a community mixer I attended alone, I overheard 2 men discussing his vanishing act. "His office phone goes straight to voicemail," one said. "I heard his partner pulled out." "Heard worse," the other man replied. "Clients are saying he's being investigated." It didn't take long for the rumors to become facts. 2 weeks later, a small piece ran in the local financial column. State launches formal inquiry into Palmer Advisory Group sources confirm the inquiry centers around unauthorized transfers, improper billing practices, and fiduciary inconsistencies spanning the last 3 years. Palmer Advisory Group has not commented. They didn't need to comment. The silence was admission. Gregor's attempts to fight back crumbled quickly after that. He tried contacting former clients to ask for letters of support. None responded. He requested a meeting with a local politician he once donated to. The meeting was canceled. And Clara? She still had her social circles, but they were shrinking. Her presence at events now drew awkward glances and muted greetings. She was no longer a woman admired. She was a woman people whispered about. She filed a new complaint. This one was personal. She requested a court-issued restraining order against me, alleging increasing intimidation, emotional volatility, and suspicious financial conduct. The judge reviewed the request and denied it within 72 hours, citing lack of evidence and conflicting testimony. Still, the damage wasn't hers alone. Anna received calls from a few of her peers, asking whether she'd be involved in any trial, whether her reputation might suffer. She responded every time with poise, "I support the truth." Not an agenda. She didn't lose a single client. But Clara and Gregor were losing everything. And they weren't done trying. They hired a new firm from out of state. Loud, flashy, known for media manipulation. I expected the worst. But when their attorneys reviewed the documents I'd compiled, bank transfers, trust declarations, recorded statements, they offered their clients a quiet warning, "You're out of options." And still, they clung to one last hope. One final lie. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. in courtroom 6B, an unassuming room with scuffed wood panels and flickering fluorescents. There was nothing glamorous about it. No oak-paneled spectacle or high-stakes theatrical flourish. But I knew the moment I stepped through the door that everything was about to shift. This was at the culmination of months of betrayal, silence, and quiet resistance. The room where facts would finally breathe louder than false narratives. I walked in wearing the same navy suit I had worn to my daughter's graduation. Not for show, not for intimidation, but because I wanted to feel rooted in the life I had built honestly, while others tried to destroy it with lies. Clara was already there. She sat on the other side of the room with her new attorney, a wiry man from out of state known for aggressive tactics and a flair for dramatic declarations. She wore a muted gray dress, her makeup subtle but strategic, her hair pulled back into the tidy bun she used when she wanted to appear serious, composed, and above reproach. But she wasn't composed. Not today. I saw the tremble in her left hand as she adjusted her papers. The dart of her eyes as she scanned the courtroom, trying to assess who might already know the truth. Gregor wasn't with her. He'd become too toxic. Even her own legal team had advised him to keep a low profile. My lawyer, Martin Kellerman, sat beside me, steady, quiet, brilliant. He wasn't flashy. That's why I hired him. He didn't posture. He planned. And everything he planned came with precision. The judge entered, a woman named Selma Harkness, known for her intolerance of nonsense and deep memory for detail. She had ruled on high-stakes corporate disputes, public corruption, even custody battles that made local headlines. She had no patience for drama and less for manipulation. We stood. We sat. The hearing began. Clara's lawyer spoke first. He was everything you'd expect. Confident, articulate, desperate. He laid out Clara's claim in broad, emotional strokes. A wife trapped in a long, emotionally coercive marriage, silenced by her husband's control of the finances, worn down by subtle manipulations and years of isolation. He referenced her fragile psychological state, claimed that the sudden freezing of accounts was a calculated act of revenge, and that she had lived in constant fear of unpredictable retaliation. As he spoke, Clara dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, perfectly timed, perfectly theatrical. Then she took the stand. She talked about the marriage like it had been a prison. She painted herself as the loving wife who had given everything, only to be dismissed, controlled, and ultimately betrayed. She accused me of financial deception, emotional cruelty, and even suggested I'd tried to undermine her maternal bond with Anna. She was good. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her myself. But I didn't know, and so did Martin. When Clara finished her testimony, her lawyer looked smug. The judge remained stone-faced. "Defense?" she asked. Martin stood, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Your Honor, if I may, we have one piece of evidence we'd like to introduce before proceeding to our client's response." "Go ahead," Judge Harkness said. Martin picked up a small USB drive and handed it to the bailiff. "A 43-minute audio recording, Your Honor. Dated and verified, obtained lawfully through a private investigator, which directly contradicts the narrative presented by the plaintiff." The courtroom fell silent as the file loaded on the overhead monitor. Clara shifted in her seat. She recognized the number 43 minutes. Her hands tightened around the handkerchief. And then the recording began. It opened with her voice clear, unmistakable. "She's acting weird." Every card declined. "I tried 3 accounts, shut down." "He knows, Clara." "He's not saying anything, but he knows." And then her reply. "He's playing dumb. He smiled when I brought it up. He's watching us unravel and pretending it's nothing." Her voice, so different now, wasn't composed or frightened. It was calculated. Cold. "We use Anna." Gregor's voice. "You think she'd go along with that?" "She doesn't need to know the full extent. Just her professional opinion. She's always resented how distant he was emotionally." Minute after minute, the conspiracy unfolded. Clara's plan to use Anna as an unwitting expert witness, to fabricate a story of emotional abuse, to paint me as the villain and secure control of the assets. She detailed every part, the story, the strategy, the roles. By minute 7, Clara's face had gone pale. By minute 15, her lawyer began scribbling on a notepad furiously. By minute 22, the judge's expression had hardened into something immovable. By minute 37, Clara was shaking. When the final minute ended, the room was so quiet I could hear the bailiff's pen click. Martin didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Judge Harkness sat for a long moment, then slowly turned to Clara. "Mrs. DeLuca," she said, "is that your voice on the recording?" Clara looked like a woman who had swallowed something burning. "Yes," she whispered. "And is that your husband you're referring to?" "Yes." "Is this a fabricated recording in any way?" "No." The judge turned to her lawyer. "Do you wish to proceed?" He stood, jaw tight. "No, Your Honor. I withdraw the complaint." "Wise," the judge said, without warmth. She took off her glasses, leaned forward slightly, and spoke in a tone that froze the air. "This court does not take kindly to manipulation of the legal system, especially when it involves premeditated perjury, falsified character claims, and attempted witness coercion. I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for review under perjury and attempted fraud statutes." Clara stared at the table motionless. Her lawyer stood, gathering his papers slowly. "Your Honor," he said, without looking at her, "my representation of Mrs. DeLuca ends effective immediately." And with that, he walked out. No further ceremony. No words exchanged. Just the sudden emptiness of someone realizing they had nothing left to hide behind. Clara remained seated for several minutes after the hearing was formally dismissed. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. I didn't approach her. What could I have said? She'd chosen her war. She'd built her battlefield. And now she was sitting alone in the crater. The silence that followed was not peace. Not at first. It was the kind of silence that arrives only after the storm has taken everything not nailed down. You walk through the house, past photographs that now look like evidence from a different life. You sit down at a table once shared with someone who had rehearsed love like a monologue. You stare at the phone that doesn't ring anymore, not with lawyers, not with accusations, not with questions from friends wondering what really happened. It's a silence that takes getting used to. But I did get used to it. The court finalized our separation 3 months after that final hearing. It wasn't dramatic, no televised conclusion or courtroom fireworks. Just paperwork and signatures, a number drawn from the terms of a marriage contract Clara had long ignored. When we married, I insisted on fairness in writing. Not because I feared betrayal, but because I believed transparency was an expression of respect. Ironically, Clara had agreed, perhaps thinking she'd never need to worry about it. In the end, that agreement saved me from further destruction. She left with what the contract allowed, A modest settlement tied to the number of years we had shared, scaled appropriately for inflation and the business's projected value. No stake in the company, no claim to the trust, no power over the estate. She tried, through another lawyer, to challenge the clauses. The judge denied it instantly. She moved out within a week. No grand goodbye, no long talk in the hallway. She took her clothes, her jewelry, a few framed photos. I watched from the office window as she climbed into the back of a rideshare car, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. She never came back. Gregor's fall was less quiet. The investigation against him turned into formal charges within 6 weeks. Wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of client funds. He was disbarred, stripped of his advisory license, and served with a civil suit by 2 former clients. His office closed overnight. Anna, having already prepared emotionally, took her final step. She filed for divorce. It wasn't vengeful. She didn't call me in tears or shout into the phone. She simply arrived at my house one morning, sat in the kitchen with her laptop open, and said, "I'm filing today." I didn't ask if she was sure. I didn't ask how she felt. I only said, "I'm proud of you." A year later, she opened her own practice, smaller, quieter, built on honesty. She declined partnership offers from larger firms and avoided those eager to use her reputation as a counterweight to scandal. She moved into a small townhouse 10 minutes from mine, furnished it herself, and hung her own shingle outside the front door. Her clients came slowly, then steadily. Word got around. She had rebuilt, from the inside out. And me? I stayed in the house people often ask why I didn't sell it, why I didn't leave behind the place where the betrayal unfolded, where years of deception were born and nurtured. But the house didn't betray me. People did. The house still had the same walls I had painted, the same kitchen where I made coffee at 5:30 a.m. for 2 decades, the same backyard where Anna once danced with sparklers in her hands on a July night. It was mine. It had always been mine. I would not let falsehood take that from me. The business recovered too. Some clients were cautious at first, curious about the headlines, hesitant to trust again. But I didn't spin a story. I didn't launch a PR campaign. I just kept showing up. Steady. Transparent. I told those who asked the truth that I had made mistakes in trust, not in numbers, that my eyes had been closed for too long, but never my integrity. They stayed. Others returned. New ones came. Within 18 months, our quarterly growth surpassed projections for the first time since the fallout began. But more than the business, I reclaimed something else, something harder to name. Clarity every night now. I walk the house with the lights low. I pass the frames I chose to leave standing, pictures of Anna as a child, my parents, even a few from our early marriage, when the smiles were still real and not yet weaponized. I leave those up not out of nostalgia, but as reminders. I once believed in love, deeply, without irony. I believed in shared effort, in partnership, in a future built one decision at a time. For a long time, I thought love was something you earned by being consistent, generous, reliable. And maybe it is. But I also learned something else. Love can be performed. It can be rehearsed with the same lines, the same touches, the same tired stories about loyalty and sacrifice. People can learn how to act like they care, perfectly, until you forget to notice the difference. The betrayal didn't begin with conspiracy. It began with small rehearsals. Little performances Clara gave at dinner, at events, at family gatherings, smiles too wide, silences too timed. I used to think she was just tired. Now I know she was curating a version of us that suited her story. And Gregor? He didn't ruin my life. He only revealed the cracks that had already spread under the surface. I learned not to hate them, not because they didn't deserve it, but because hatred is exhausting. It doesn't rebuild. It only burns. And I had already lost enough to fire. I speak to Anna often. She visits on Sundays. We cook. Sometimes we don't talk about any of it. Sometimes we do. And each time, she thanks me not for being perfect, but for not running. You stayed still, she told me once. And the truth rose around you. That's what I remember most now, not the betrayal, not the courtrooms, not the recordings, but that I stayed still and the truth rose.